Remove every obvious threat from someone's life. No conflict at work, no rival to compete against, no political opponent to argue with, no outside group to define themselves against. And then watch carefully, because in study after study, across cultures and across time, something surprisingly consistent begins to happen. People find a new enemy, or, more unsettlingly, they create one. This is not something limited to certain kinds of people. It is not a personality flaw or a defect in character. It is something much older than personality itself, something woven into the deeper architecture of how human beings create identity, belonging, and meaning. And understanding that does not excuse the behavior. If anything, it makes it harder to ignore, especially in yourself. The group that only knows itself, by contrast. In 1970, social psychologist René Tajfel carried out an experiment that would permanently change how psychologists thought about groups and identity. He gathered complete strangers together, people with no shared history, no friendships, no real connection of any kind. Then he divided them into groups using something almost absurdly meaningless. In one version of the experiment, participants simply looked at abstract paintings and were told they preferred one artist rather than another. The assignment was essentially random, and yet something remarkable happened. People immediately began favoring their own group. They gave more resources to people on their side. They described members of their own group as more trustworthy, more capable, more likable, not because they knew them, not because they had earned it, simply because they belonged. Tajfel called this social identity theory, and its central idea was simple but deeply unsettling. A large part of who we believe ourselves to be is not created individually at all. It comes from groups. But identity has a problem. It struggles to exist in isolation, because groups become meaningful through contrast. We becomes meaningful because there is a they. The boundary matters, not because the boundary is always real, but because it gives shape to the self. We do not simply belong to groups. Very often, we understand ourselves through what we believe we are not. The strange comfort of a shared enemy. Another perspective comes from philosopher René Girard. Girard spent decades studying myths, religion, and human conflict, and he noticed a pattern that appeared again and again. Communities under stress often resolve internal tension by directing it toward a single target, a person, a group, someone to blame. Because tension inside a community is messy. Everyone has frustrations, everyone has grievances, everyone wants different things. And when those tensions remain unresolved, the strain begins to pull the group apart. An enemy simplifies everything. Suddenly, the people who were divided have something shared between them. They stand on the same side. The relief can feel immediate, almost intoxicating, because instead of fighting one another, everyone can look outward together. And the disturbing part is that the target often has very little to do with the original problem. The unity is real, but it is built on displacement. The conflict has not disappeared, it has simply been moved. There is another layer beneath all of this, one that reaches into something much deeper. Psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Piszczynski developed what became known as terror management theory, building on ideas from cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker. The theory begins with a difficult observation. Human beings are aware of something most living creatures never fully comprehend. We know that our lives end, and somewhere beneath everyday awareness, that knowledge creates tension. So people build systems of meaning around themselves, beliefs, values, worldviews, stories about who they are and why they matter. These structures do more than organize life. They protect us. They help hold back something heavier. Experiments repeatedly found that when people are gently reminded of mortality, they become more attached to their own beliefs and often more hostile toward beliefs that challenge them. Because if a worldview is helping hold existential fear at a distance, disagreement stops feeling like disagreement. It starts feeling like danger, and danger creates a powerful urge, not just to disagree, but to defeat. Why opposition creates connection so quickly. There is a reason shared enemies bond people so efficiently. For most of human history, responding together to external threats was directly tied to survival. Groups that could unite quickly had advantages, and over time, minds adapted accordingly. Shared opposition feels powerful because it once served an important purpose. It creates closeness quickly, sometimes faster than shared affection. Shared affection asks for time, for vulnerability, for trust. Shared opposition can happen in an instant. You can see it almost everywhere. Sports rivalries, workplace divisions, school friendships built around disliking the same person. Even romantic relationships where people sometimes feel especially close after facing a problem together. The closeness itself is real, but there is a hidden cost, because if the bond depends on the enemy, then the enemy becomes part of the structure holding the bond together when the enemy disappears. And this is where things become strange. When groups build themselves around opposition, removing the enemy can create confusion, even crisis. Researchers and historians have repeatedly observed this pattern. Once the external threat disappears, the internal differences that were hidden underneath begin to reappear. The arguments return, the fractures return, because they never actually left, they were simply overshadowed. And this helps explain why people sometimes seem to create conflict when none exists. Not because they are irrational, not because they enjoy suffering, but because something in the structure has lost its shape. And without something to stand against, identity itself can begin to feel unsteady. So the mind reaches for contrast, a rival, a disagreement, a new villain, something to restore clarity. None of this means opposition itself is bad. Real injustice exists, real disagreements matter, real conflicts sometimes require people to stand firmly against something. The difficult question is not whether conflict exists, the difficult question is whether the conflict has quietly become larger than reality requires, whether some part of the mind needed an enemy because opposition feels cleaner than uncertainty, because clarity can be comforting, even false clarity. And sometimes what feels like conviction is partly something else, identity quietly searching for shape. The need for an enemy is not something that belongs only to other people. It lives in the same mind you are using right now. It is older than your opinions, older than your current disagreements, older than the stories you tell yourself about why you stand where you stand. Learning its name does not make it disappear, but it changes something important. The next time opposition starts feeling unusually satisfying, the question becomes different. Not simply, am I right? But do I need this to be bigger than it really is? Is this clarity coming from truth or from the much older comfort of finally having something to stand against? The question will not solve every conflict, but it might reveal who is actually speaking when the conflict begins. Stay curious. The next one is already on its way.